Well, greetings. It's Dr. Dean Blevins, and welcome back to another sort of instructional videos. One way to think about this for CD605, Gospel Catechesis, where I'm kind of taking you through different elements of the class to help you sort of understand what's involved and what I expect as a part of that. And this time, we're going to start by going back to the assignments. And we've spent a lot of time already sort of working through the navigation of what's going on. When it comes to the assignments for the class, we spent a whole video just talking about what I'm looking for in the reading, writing, and engagement during the weekly period. Done a video that really sort of explains the narratives, the three sort of application papers, and even the book reflection and how you're applying ideas from this concept of catechesis to a given book review and what's expected there. So those videos are available. But this time we want to talk about probably the other assignment that you're probably very nervous about, either from the beginning of the semester or definitely as the semester unfolds, and obviously by the end of the semester, which is the catechesis project. Now, depending on when you take this class, if it's a summer school class, that's a 30% of your grade. During the regular semester, just because we have more time for online engagement, it's only 25%. It's still a large part of your grade. When you open up the assignment, what it will basically say is that part of the discipleship process, we've talked about that in the introduction, is teaching people of all ages the essentials of Christian belief, disposition, and practice, which we will be talking about throughout the semester. Therefore, you will create a catechesis process for a specific ministry context. That's normally a congregation. It might be a church plant. I've actually had projects like that. Sometimes it might be a very special setting, but normally I would say get pre-approval if it's not a congregation. So I'm just going to name that now. Additional information will be provided as the project unfolds, which is this video is a part of it. And then basically you're to assess the current efforts in catechesis in the ministry on both historic and contemporary influences, and then suggest a planned catechesis. And it can be at a specific age level or within a given cohort within the congregation. And I'll explain that a little bit more as we go forward. It can be about the whole church, so I want you to hear that. But if your group, picks a church that is 5,000 members and you really want to focus on one age level, but you're still talking about maybe 500 children or 250 to 300 youth, I hope you hear manageability is a part of the consideration of what this project is all about. But how does this work? How do I get to that end project? Well, the first thing I'm going to say is you begin by looking at the rubrics. So don't forget that when you go to the modules, you're going to find rubrics for all the activities. And so that's a good place to kind of begin to look at the material. But the other thing you're going to find out is this is a project that you do not do alone. It's very rare now that we allow students to do independent projects on their own. As a matter of fact, you're going to be involved in a team that's engaged in a project, and that will also include a team project evaluation of your teammates at the end of the semester. Why? Well, let's just be honest. When I first started teaching this class, actually even earlier iterations than the Gospel Catechesis course, but just going back to my beginning at Asbury, most of the people doing online education in those days were at a distance. They were working fully in a ministry location. They already came as pastors involved, and they were smaller, more intense classes. Sometimes around 10 or 11 even, I remember those days, where the direct application to that local context was just obvious and immediate in a way in which the education occurred. Nowadays, we have larger classes. A lot of times, some of you will be coming in, maybe not even with a focus on the Master of Divinity, but you might be in a different degree path. And we still want you to know about the importance of teaching catechesis, but you may not have as deep a history and heritage and experience as some of your classmates in this course. And so what we want to do is try to put together teams where you can be sort of helping each other toward a single project. And so one of the things I'm going to say right up front is that very early, week one of the things you're asked is to introduce yourself, a little bit of your personal journey. But it does say, since the class will be working on a final project in small groups, we tell about your ministry experience, church ministries or other ministries, church size, years of experience, and include this information at the beginning of your narrative. Excuse me. So, right from the beginning of the semester, I want to know where are you, what do you bring to the conversation, so that as I am building teams together, I have a way of trying to put people in, not who have just a shared location, but sometimes have different gifts, graces, different skill sets, and trying to balance the teams at least based upon the experience you do have. Let me just say this now. This is not a place to oversell yourself. This is just a place to name where you are. If you're an experienced pastor, if you've been doing ministry for 20 years and you bring that to this conversation, name it. If you've been working primarily in small churches versus large churches, name it. If you've been a staff pastor for 5 years, name that. You've only done internships, be honest about that. If Asbury is the first stop in your calling to ministry, and you've basically worked as a volunteer and you've been involved in those kinds of settings, name that. If you are in transition, maybe you were active in a church, but you're not there anymore, and therefore to access that church would be more difficult, and you'd have to rely upon someone who's there to help you as the team is working together, name that. The more I know, without it being 2 pages, but in a paragraph, the more I know about what your experience is, where you're located now, the better I can create teams that hopefully will be helpful with each other. I cannot gauge, particularly early in the semester, how committed you are to the class. And so sometimes I get 3 or 4 high performance performers in one small group and 2 or 3 others who are just not as high performance in another small group. I recognize that, but at least if I can create a balance of experiences inside the classes, it gives me a place to move forward. So be honest with that in week one. Then what you'll find is, and it may surprise you as you work through the weeks, usually sometime around week 4 or 5, you see this little prompt called Catechesis Project Group Discussions. And I am going to, through announcements, as I've talked about before, other things, encourage you to go online, because by then I will have identified which group you're a part of. And when you click on that link, what it will do will take you to a page that has only the members of your group inside that given page. And so you'll do greetings and introductions, and then you'll start talking about your context and really get into the business of things. And these become kind of the first place for your group always to sort of get together and have a discussion with each other. If you're afraid you're going to misplace that location, that prompt, let me just be upfront that you will always, in the modular section, the very first link is to the Catechesis Project Group Discussions. And so if you're needing to check in with your group, all you got to do is go to modules, and you'll always find the link right there at the very beginning of the module. If you go down to, I think, well, let's just do syllabus. I don't think it's true with the syllabus because those are, but if you go down to discussions, one time where these are slightly different, yes, it's pinned to the very top as well. So I intentionally try to put this at the top of a couple of different ways of getting at this, so that regardless of where you are in the week, you can always get back to that particular discussion. By the way, there's also a place for prayer requests and general course questions over the semester. Most of you have had Canvas know those are there, and I would encourage you to use those also. But for now, we're just trying to say, what do we do with the Catechesis project? Well, probably outside of week one's introductions, And when you offer that, the more information I have really makes a difference. Here's a good example. This is one of a bad example. This is someone who posted, since I mentioned this last time, posted through the Canvas app. And so instead of posting to her section where everybody else had their introductions and greetings to each other. So this is just a good example. Hannah actually posted her introduction through the app, and it actually showed up on this page, and then she couldn't find it for the first half of the week. Wasn't sure what had happened to it until I pointed out where the problem was. But once you have actually posted your introduction and list your experience, until I assign you to a team, there's not much you can be doing. So don't worry. If it's in the summer, I will probably make those assignments pretty early, week 2 at the latest, week 3. So that's why I need to have those introductions done pretty early, and I try to balance the teams out so that by the beginning of week 3, you're already having conversations with each other, getting to know one another from that standpoint. But then what's the next major task that you have to do before it's all said and done? Well, a good example, and let me get to the small group again. The first thing you have to do is talk about, see, there are a lot of introductions to each other, but then once it's all said and done, the most important thing that you can do is to talk about your context. Unfortunately, with this crowd, they were just trying to get together from the beginning. And so you get lots of interactions with each other, trying to set up a Zoom link, which is pretty important before it's all said and done. But I'm going to kind of slide out of here for now. I'll not yet. Let me just say that once you give greetings to each other on the Canvas portal, then probably the first thing you need to do is try to figure out how you're going to connect with each other. And what's the easiest way, whether it's going to be through Zoom or whether it might be through other forms of communication, Google Chat, for instance. Some of the groups actually go to the point of setting up a Google Room through the Asbury account, and you can do that, or they use chat. Some set up Google Pages so they can share work that way. But what you're trying to do as a team is organize what's the best way to communicate with each other. So that's important. But then the next thing is picking a context. And I'll be honest, until you do at least a baptismal themes paper, you haven't written up your context. So it will probably be that week that your group will sort of kind of talk to each other. You can post at least the demographic information of your congregation. You don't have to post your whole baptismal theme paper unless you choose to do that. But at that point, there'll be group discernment to kind of figure out which context, which ministry, which church are you going to focus the catechetical project on. And then once you do that, now that you have a context, you can begin to bring to bear the fullness of what the semester has to offer to that given context. Now, the course is set up in such a way that there's no one right way of sort of unpacking that context or offering responses. It might be the best way to unpack that context is through the theological themes. And you'll note there are 2 or 3 themes that just are gaps that you need to kind of improve in. You'll find in Grounded in the Gospel, probably 6 or 7 different approaches, templates, if you will, of sort of using principles from catechesis, the history of catechesis, to sort of overlay, to understand how well this church does in communicating the way, the truth, or the life, which is one of those frameworks, or the 5 fonts of faith, and how that works, or how to move from what the authors will call proto-catechesis to formal catechesis to ongoing catechesis, and how does even that work across the life of the church. And so there'll be different ways of sort of analyzing the church. We'll even go so far as also asking, how do practices maybe provide the best analysis of the church and which practices are going well, and might there be others that could help deepen the catechetical life, the catechesis of that within that congregation. So the context is really important because the context really does shape how you're going to apply all these other principles and concepts to that given context. Yes, the context may have a ton of programs, or it may have maybe a very informal church plant. And I hope you hear either of those may have different kinds of challenges. Maybe an aging congregation, it could be one that has sort of taken off with young families. It may be one where the challenge, again, if it's a very large church, is specifically in and through the youth ministry. And at that point, maybe, late in the semester will be more some of Kenda Dean's work and her observations that get incorporated into that. But you even still have to think about that youth ministry in light of the full life of the church. And that's what the baptismal themes assignment is supposed to be focused on. So what is going on in the church that you can rely on outside of just the silo of the youth ministry that informs that? All of this becomes part of that project conversation. And picking a good context where the person who's in that context can provide additional information for the team is the most important thing. It does not mean that that person's information about that context should dictate all of the interventions, the strategies, the ideas in the comprehensive sort of curricular plan that the team as a whole brings to that. If that happens, there's an individual project with just a bunch of people looking on, and that does tend not to work well. But instead, the person whose context is chosen becomes the key informant to that context to provide feedback to the rest of the team as the rest of the team works together with that person to create a comprehensive plan moving forward. So I would say that different people connect in different ways depending on how the team can get together. Finding a time where you can meet regularly, via Zoom or chat, is really important. Definitely having something where you can at least touch base early in the project. As you can see, these people were really fighting to get that information out there early, is really crucial as you go along. You will see, and I'll just back this up, since this class actually had 8 different groups, that different groups had different numbers of exchanges because some of the groups did work outside of these forums to communicate through chat or through Google Docs or other things. I would just ask as the professor that you keep me up to speed, and the best way to do that is to do it through the forums. Early to middle of the semester, that normally was pretty limited engagement. But then by mid-semester on, it becomes pretty intense. And so what happens is that you may be doing a lot more offline outside these forums than you do inside the forums themselves. But do at least post, if somebody keeps minutes of your meeting, post copies of the minutes. This is the way I know your groups are working. And so that I can help and try to coach as you're going along. Worst case scenario is you do not keep me informed, the group does get in trouble, and as a result of that, at the end of the semester, things I could have done to help during the semester just doesn't occur, and it's too late at that point. Again, I'll stress, this is a project that unfolds over the semester. It's deeply tied to a given context. So that's why that first baptismal themes paper can be very helpful, because it can at least give you a starting point, though you can then think about other ways of unpacking that context. If that's not the best way, trust me, there'll be at least 2 other approaches, one through Packer and Parrott's book, another one through Practicing Our Faith. And yes, there's even program discussions at the end, but I would not wait for those program discussions to think about what your intervention is going to be. It really should start with a robust conversation earlier in the semester, and you keep tabs with each other as the semester unfolds. Do we have people drop out of the class? Yes. Yeah. Sometimes very early. If someone's not active, in online engagement in your small group, and I'll try to track that myself. But if there's not someone who's really staying connected, I need to know that, say 2 or 3 weeks in, just to find out where they are. Because often if they're not engaged in the small group, they're probably not engaged in the larger class discussions. And that's a red flag that they may not be with you all the way to the end. Are there people that drop out late? Yes, that happens. Personal uh, issues come up, family crises come up, those kinds of things. And I've had people either have to take an incomplete and drop away from the team project, or just basically drop out of the class. Normally, I will say to you, if you're going to run into a problem late in the semester, so you don't know this now, but say very late in the semester, and you come to me and say, what can I do? The first thing I'm normally going to do is say to you, stay with the team project, because that's a big part of the grade. You don't need to replicate all that work on your own. Stay with that, and then let's navigate the other elements of the class, and let's see what you can do to finish out some of the writings and even the book reflection, in and through an incomplete later. Um, and normally that's important not only for you, but also for your classmates. If someone does drop out late, does that mean you get a pass? You get a smaller paper? You don't have to turn in as much work? Unfortunately, no. I'm still assessing the quality of the work in light of the context. It's ministry. It's what happens in church when suddenly a volunteer no longer can contribute to a ministry initiative. It's just part of what we do. I try to be mindful of how much work you've had to do, but you're not able to turn in just sublet work expecting me to bump it automatically as a result of that. People go, how big is this project supposed to be? Well, what I tend to find is that good projects run somewhere between 15 to 20 pages, or 18 to 25 if it's a bigger project. But normally you can get the contextual analysis in. You can decide where the strategies are going to be. You can marshal the resources in such a way that they connect and that they make a difference within about an 18-page paper. If you have lots of charts and plans that you have, make those appendices. Make sure the paper has a rolling narrative. Think about it as if a church board member was handed this to read prior to a meeting. Think about it as if you were planning this and you were taking it to some of your leadership, staff, or maybe even sometimes at a district level, to support the efforts that you're going to do. So it needs to be a very consistent, coherent, well-written project that reflects the fullness of the unity of the presentation. So maybe one thing you might want to do is identify who in your group is a really good editor, and at least give them a little bit of a pass through some of the project work so they can do the work at the end to smooth out the edges, make sure the formatting is correct, make sure the citations are accurate. Yes, I am going to look for citations. If you're going to be talking about initiatives, always make sure that you include where those initiatives came from, because if you're going to hand it to somebody outside of this class environment, they may need to know where this information came from. But ultimately, this is, again, an application of the material from in the class. Two final thoughts. One, should you focus both, and you'll hear this language as the semester goes, in both the grounding and the growing? Should you focus on the very aspects of baptism, either confirmation or infant baptism or adult baptism, and what does that look like as a part of the strategy? Yeah, that can be part of it. But also, should you focus on the ongoing life of the church, how to really help deepen in the ongoing engagement and growth in and through catechesis as a theme? Yes, you can include that broader vision. And depending on that church's tradition, you may put more emphasis on the ongoing than you do in the initiation phase. Or sometimes, because of that tradition, you may decide really to put even more emphasis on that initiation phase, whether or not it's around baptism, but some way of orienting people as they first come into the life of the church, as well as helping the church at large. That's a balance between those two. The other thing people ask me is, do you need a lengthy discussion around baptism as a part of this paper? And I would say a lot of times MATS or MBS students, because they're more interested in the theory, are really engaged at that point around that. Let me just go ahead and say, no, you do need to provide enough information about what is catechesis to help someone read this so that as they look at your strategy, they know why you're using this language and where it leads to. So yeah, maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs early, defining catechesis, helping people understand why you're using this language, and then you move on. But if you give me and I've had this happen, 25-page paper, of which 7 or 8 of those pages were a lengthy reintroduction to catechesis, its history, its theology, its practice, then you're handing me basically, well, really closer to a 17-page paper or an 18. It's interesting reading, but we've been engaged in that all semester. You do not have to demonstrate that comprehensiveness in this project. What you have to demonstrate is application of the principles and practices to a given context in such a way that it is coherent in its organization, it's consistent with the resources that we talked about during the semester. So you've drawn from those appropriately, and it makes a difference. It's pertinent in that context. And so take a minute, look over the rubric. I'm not going to walk you through it right now, but trust me, let the rubric be your friend as you think about taking on a given context. And I think you'll be okay. You may be surprised at what kind of good work you can do that not only is communicated to the professor in such a way that it's helpful in demonstrating your understanding and your ability as a team to begin to use these principles of catechesis for truly transformative discipleship, but it might actually make explicit difference in that particular local congregation or context right away. What could you hope for more than that? That you're actually helping a congregation in and through your graduate work at Asbury Theological Seminary. That you're actually demonstrating leadership even while you're a student in the way you're making a difference for the sake of the kingdom of God. That's why this project is here. Yes, to test your ability to understand these concepts with a given context in mind, but also to make a difference through this. And I look forward to those projects. You may be surprised at what you discover, but that becomes the last major assignment for the semester. So I hope this is helpful. I hope it's not fearful, but I hope it's been helpful in helping you get sort of even footing, even as we engage this class during the semester. So blessings to you, and we'll see you online.